So welcome everyone. My name is Samantha Bruno. I'm the Career Services Coordinator at Marxe Career Services. I'm joined here with Suzanne Grossman, who is the Deputy Director of Career Services and Alumni Relations. Thank you all for joining us for Getting a PhD, Perspectives from MPA and MIA Marxe Alumni. I'm very excited to introduce our three panelists, Ken Silverman, Jackie Chiofalo, and Janet Dewart Bell. So we'll go ahead and get kicked off. If each of you could please just introduce yourselves and the PhD program that you are in or have completed, and just a brief overview of your role.
Go first. My name is Jackie Chiofalo. I am the Director of Health Policy Research at the Institute for Family Health, which is a community health center network. I have a master's in public administration from Baruch, and I'm currently at the Community School of Public Health getting a PhD in community health and health policy. That was all the questions, right? Okay.
I'm Dr. Janet Dewart Bell, and among other things, I am assistant adjunct professor at the Marxe School, and I see a couple of my students who have joined us today, and so they could tell you more about what I think about the PhD program probably than I can, at least add on to, because I encourage people in my classes to go further than their master's degree, to get doctorates, because I think doctorates are very important. I have an executive master's from Baruch. I have 3 other degrees, all from Antioch College and Antioch University, where I have a doctorate in leadership and change. A couple of other things that I should mention, just because it gives a little bit of background with me, is that I'm the founder and president of Lead Intergenerational Solutions, which does what the name says. Which does what the name implies. And I'm just delighted to be part of a conversation that talks about doctoral studies and encourages people. I don't think that everyone needs to get a doctorate. So I say that my fingers are crossed behind my back, but I think it's a very important thing for those who wish to do so.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ken Silverman, and thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. So I am currently in the political science PhD program at the CUNY Graduate Center. I'm in my 2nd year. I'm also, and I'll talk about this later, but our program has its students teach. So I'm currently teaching at CUNY Queens College. And I'm working on some other research projects as a part of the program. I was in the MIA program at the Marxe School and graduated in 2019, right before the pandemic. So looking forward to answering questions. And also I should mention that I know of a couple other Marxe graduates who are planning to apply to PhD programs this year. So you are not alone. There are others out there. So happy to answer questions and give any advice to folks.
Great. Thank you so much, all of you, for those great introductions. So we'll go ahead and get started. So how did you all decide to go for your PhD? And if specifically, how did your master's degree at Marxe help guide your application or your thought process?
Well, I've always believed in the power of education, and I don't know if early in my life I didn't really think about a doctoral program, but as the years went by, and I think I'm one of the seniors on this part of this discussion. And so I really wanted to go beyond my master's. When I got my master's at Baruch, I had the great fortune of having among my professors David Birdsell, Frederick Lane, and the current acting dean of the Marxe School, Nancy Aries. Also, I had as an adjunct professor, Gail Brewer. So I just had a fantastic group of people, and I was excited. The program itself was just so wonderful. And after that, I decided during the course of of my attending the program for my master's, I decided I wanted to go further and get a doctorate. And it was just that I had role models outside of Baruch, but inside Baruch, I also had them. And I was very impressed with what they had done. And I realized too, that as I had done, even though I was a late bloomer, I went to Baruch late. I was a mid or almost late careers. I went to Antioch as a late careerist, I will say that. And but I was impressed when I would give speeches and things, because I have a long background of working, that those who had the title doctor seemed to have gotten just a little bit more respect. And particularly when it came to women, despite that terrible article that guy wrote earlier this year saying that Dr. Jill Biden should just be called kiddo, among other things. And it was just those kinds of experiences when I was part of panels, and they would go through and they would say, Doctor this, Reverend this, or what have you. And then they get to me and they'd say, Janet. And so finally I decided, I want them to say Dr. Bell.
I think that's a really legit reason, Dr. Bell, to get a PhD. It's definitely something I considered when I was in Marx. I really loved the core classes that you had to take, because it really kind of forced me to kind of explore what aspects I was really interested in. And what I ended up really loving and taking a lot more electives in was research. I know that they had a GIS class seminar that I ended up taking on a Saturday, and just like continually go back to, even in the year 2021, when I took this class in 2017, I still use those skills. And I ended up writing my capstone on examining lead poisoning in children, and it eventually got published. And it was one of those, yeah, I know, it's not to humble brag, but it was pretty cool. But I would have never been able to do that without kind of my master's program, and where I was beginning to kind of direct myself based on what my interests were. And I really realized, kind of similar to Dr. Bell, that, if you want to do research seriously and discuss policy and be taken a lot more seriously, and have the authority and also guide where a lot of these conversations are going, you kind of need that upper degree. And so I wrote my capstone, got a new job, and in that kind of like year of questioning, I was like, yeah, I think I would be really interested, and would be a good opportunity for me to get a doctorate.
Could I just add a couple things? And I thank you so much for those comments. But the one thing I forgot to mention, all the people I named, with the exception of Gail Brewer, who is my favorite public servant, by the way, had doctorates. And so that was part of my journey, knowing that they had done this, and they were all just wonderful professors. They would have been wonderful professors with or without a doctorate, but the fact that they had a doctorate was encouraging to me. And also, like you, I love to do research. I'm perfectly happy in a little room doing research and writing. For part of the time, I prefer teaching than doing writing sometimes, but it was just part of that learning journey. I consider myself a lifelong learner, and having a doctorate has really added to that.
For sure.
And congratulations on your publication.
Oh, thank you.
So I guess I'll give my experience. Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that was just said. And I too was a late bloomer. I came back to school, mid-career. I was working as a journalist for a Japanese news network, and then came back to get my master's at Baruch. And yeah, it changed my life. And I also was inspired by, amazing role models, the professors at the Marxe School. I definitely did not grow up dreaming that I was going to get a doctorate. This is something that happened later in life and happened while I was at the Marxe School. I guess the easy, the best way to put it is I was just having so much fun learning and doing research that I didn't want to stop. I wanted to continue. And I was really fortunate to have professors that encouraged me to take that next step and really help me, figure out how what I was working on can actually make a difference, later on. So I'm actually, continuing the research that I was doing for my capstone. I'm actually working on that right now in the political science program. And I presented that work in Japan earlier this year, for example. So yeah, it's just, I kind of see this as a continuation of what I started at the Marxe School. And I would also, I can name drop the professors if you like who guided me. But yeah, I mean, there were just so many great people that I met. And I too, I wanted to be like my role models, and they did have doctorates, and it didn't seem like something that was exclusive. They did make it seem like if you really want it, you can get it, and we'll show you how. We'll help you, and they really did that for me. So I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them.
Thank you all. For the next question, if you're able to share, what is or what was your dissertation about? If you're in the research process, could you kind of give us how you kind of narrowed down the topic, or what your thought process is on that right now?
Dr. Bell, I think you need to say this as someone who's completed a PhD. You should take the lead.
Well, I'm happy to say that. I was looking for the book which grew out of my dissertation. I have a book called Lighting the Fires of Freedom, African American Women in the Civil Rights Movement. The book itself grew out of the research for my dissertation, but the research for my dissertation grew out of my life's passion and my work, because I have experience in I'm a civil rights movement veteran. I always say my age so that it puts me in context. I was born in 1946. I've been involved in all the great social justice movements from the mid 20th century to the 21st century. I am proud of that. I'm excited about that. My passion for social justice it's usually palpable. Almost as palpable as I tell people, I bleed Baruch blue. Baruch has been such a wonderful experience for me. And so I am always happy to share the experiences that I have had. So I have from this life work, even though my career has been communications oriented, but it's always been communications for a purpose, for social justice. That's how I got in communications really in the first place, because when I grew up, they said, if you have good ideas, don't keep them to yourself. So you have, part of the reason you do that, you can express it through journalism, you can express it through writing and what have you. So my forthcoming book is going to be, I've done a lot of writing and a lot of publications in between, but my forthcoming book is called Blackbirds Singing. It's inspiring political speeches by African-American women from the Civil War to the 21st century. So I have a little theme going here, and I'm excited about it. And yes, so what I'll say is that if to pursue a doctorate by itself, you have to have the passion, because it's a lot of work. It takes stamina. It takes at times great sacrifice. It takes understanding if you happen to be lucky enough to have a partner, be living with other people, because you have to be focused on the work to really get the most out of it. So one thing that someone said to me, and I will share that with you, is your area of research if it's something that you are passionate about, that you really care about, it makes the whole process easier. It's not really work. It's exploration, it's learning, it's sharing.
That is some pretty good sound advice for someone who is a little wishy-washy on this question, not outing myself, but that's me. My dissertation is still up in the air. I have a few, and by a few, I mean a year left to kind of really nail down a topic. But where I'm beginning to lead is either looking at some of the systematic and organizational factors that contribute to health disparities in New York City, or some sort of intervention implementation project about how organizations could better use measurements to assess health equity with kind of the goal of eliminating health disparities. And that definitely stems from my past experiences. I worked at a hospital that had a program for survivors of torture and human rights abuses. And just seeing kind of like the disparate care that they were receiving really ignited a flame and a passion in me to work towards eliminating those disparities and making healthcare one of the places where structural and systematic racism didn't play a role in disparate outcomes. So I'm leaning more towards that. And it's really kind of like intersects really nicely with my master's in public administration, because I'm really interested in organizational changes. And since I'm doing community health and health policy, there's a lot of individual factors that play into roles, but I'm really interested and driven by the ways that organizations can contribute to that. So talk to me in a year later and maybe I'll give you a more concrete answer, but that's where I am right now.
So I'm even in an earlier phase of the PhD process, and I'm just in my third semester. So I haven't even done my comp exams yet. So that's kind of the next step. But of course, you always have in the back of your mind, what is the hole in the literature that I can fill? And as I'm trying to answer that question, I'm certainly thinking about the next steps. And so my capstone at the Marxe School was kind of semi-autobiographical, because I'm a dual citizen of the US and Japan, and I wanted to understand why a country like Japan that's aging and shrinking and could really use some immigrants to boost its economy and so forth, and that Japan is not alone in this situation, right? There's a lot of other countries in a similar situation demographically, but I wanted to understand why Japan and other East Asian democracies were so restrictive when it came to dual citizenship. And the big picture is kind of, what does this mean for migrant political incorporation more broadly, as migration becomes more commonplace, not just in the traditional destinations like the US and Western Europe, but in other countries that are not used to or don't have as long of a history of incorporating migrants. And so as I'm trying to answer these questions, I'm actually going to be working on a research project starting hopefully soon, where we're analyzing data from this past 2021 primary election in New York City. So we're going to be looking at election districts with that have large immigrant populations, and it's hopefully going to spur some ideas about a possible dissertation topic. But just kind of looking at, okay, so we know we can kind of see what the patterns are and how the political socialization of immigrants happens in a place like New York City, which is very used to incorporating immigrants. And then what does that mean? And can that even be a model, for other cities and countries that are kind of just, entering this phase where they're having more people who want to come and work and live in their societies. And what does that mean when migrants, or basically how do migrants become citizens, right? That's kind of at the core of the question that I'm seeking to answer. So I also hope to have a more definitive topic soon, but I'm looking forward to kind of exploring that through this research project that I'm working on at the Graduate Center, which is a great place if you want to do research on New York City. There's a lot of resources there to do that.
I'd like to say that where you are is a very good place to be. One of the things that they encouraged me in my program, my doctoral program at Antioch, is to be curious, like you mentioned, inquisitive, and and not be so set on the final question. I just happen to, because of my age and experience, I just happened to start zeroing in on what I wanted to do after the first year. Another person suggested that, and it depends on the doctoral program that you're going in, but they said, for example, you said to build on the capstone. So they said so think about the papers and the research you're doing early, and so that fits in with with your final work on your dissertation. So that helps too. So it's almost conflicting in a sense, because you don't want to necessarily settle on what the exact question is you want to solve, but you also want to make sure that all that beautiful research that you're doing and keeping in fine order in these electronic files will be helpful as you finish your doctorate.
Wonderful, wonderful. Dr. Bell, you actually had led into the next question that we have. You reflected on how important it is to have the passion for your topic and the support around you as you're going through your PhD. So I'll ask, I'll go ask all three of you, what tips do you have for students who are contemplating pursuing a PhD? Is there anything aside from, what aside from the passion and, what academic preparedness do you need? Is it because a PhD is a life encompassing event. It does take time, it does take passion. So what tips do you have for our students who are contemplating it?
To clear the deck a little bit. By that I mean that to create a space of your own. By that I mean that the people who did well in the program that I attended, they all talked about having to carve out a space, whether it was their space at the kitchen table, whether it was their space in their office or what have you, or carve out the time between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., whatever, is that they had to find a specific space and claim that for their work. And so as people are thinking about the doctoral program, it's in some ways it's daunting, but I have to say when I look back on it, it was a lot of fun. In fact, I was having too much fun studying that my academic advisor called me in and said, you really have to graduate now. I said, oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice in terms of making sure you have, personally, professionally, the time to set aside for a PhD. But I also think, when we're saying a doctorate, I'm not saying a doctorate in what, there's so many different programs and opportunities for you to find one that really fits. I know the CUNY School of Public Health, where I go to school, 70% of our my peers are part-time. Many of them have kids and families and also full-time jobs. So they are heroes in my view. I don't know how they do it. I have a dog and I'm like, oh my gosh, got to schedule to walk, then do my readings, then log into work. And so I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think in the correct environment, it really is possible for everyone, regardless of their life situation. So as long as you guys have the drive and the motivation and a clear, your clear vocation and your why that you want to pursue a PhD, then there's definitely a program somewhere out there in the world for you to really pursue that passion.
And a legitimate PhD program. I say that because a friend of mine enrolled in one of these online programs. She told me afterwards, because she was embarrassed to say, I said, why in the world would you do that and not tell me? Because I would have done my best to talk her out of it, because that does, if you want to have a wonderful experience, it's a life-changing experience, I think, to get a doctorate. but you also want to have something that is meaningful to your career and to the rest of the world. So you really want to have a program that that is legitimate, that you can look at and say, oh, that, so that when people see that you're a doctorate, they don't go, you went where? You don't want to have that question mark. You really want to have a legitimate program, and you want to explore ways to get it done so that it is as close to being as cost effective as you can make it, because it's not cheap. And so it's really something to think about, and know that, and you're right, people who go to CUNY schools, there's just so many heroic people that do as you suggested, but they actually do it, and through pandemics, through what have you, they get the job done.
Yeah, and I think also something that's unique and that I've seen in the program is that the staff and the faculty are really committed to your success and will work with you to ensure that you know, survive. I don't want to say it's a survival, but that that you can do the best with the resources you have, and I think that's really important. Something I really appreciate as a current student. But yeah, I will asterisk that with a program with accreditation.
Yes, and now stop talking. But there's one thing that's very important too when you're pursuing. Once you get to the point where you have a dissertation committee, make sure you have a great committee chair who does what you suggested, who's totally supportive of you and helps guide you through the process. Because there's so many horror stories of people who have dissertation committees or particular dissertation chairs that do not do that. So you want to, whatever school it is, you want to see what the graduation rate is. If you start looking at their people that are all but, ABT, all but dissertation, don't go to that school.
Dr. Bell, I feel like I need to ask you to be on my dissertation committee by the end of this. You've just been you're so knowledgeable and so awesome about this. But kind of also to piggyback off of what you said, a lot of these schools have published dissertations on their website. So if you actually want to make sure that your interests and what you're going for a PhD coincides with what the school is providing, what's at the table and what students are graduating with, you can actually look up people's dissertation projects on their library, and just peruse and just be like, wow, that was a really good paper, or ooh, maybe not a good program for me. So
I would just add, you also want to look at the faculty who are there. You want to think about who you want to work with. These are, the world experts in whatever field you're hoping to pursue. But yeah, definitely you're going to be spending a number of years with presumably with, the faculty there. So definitely read up on them and think about who you'd want to work with. I think that's also important. Yeah, and I guess another factor, that Jackie just mentioned, right? Everyone's life situation is different. It has to make sense for you, right? It has to make sense for your career, because there is, income sacrifice, maybe is a nice way to put it, right? Because you are kind of taking a pay cut in order to invest in yourself. And if you're able to do that, and you're able to kind of, look towards the long term, then it can definitely make sense for you. And then also, as Dr. Bell said, if you're having fun, in your master's program, then it's for you. If you're not having fun, it's probably not for you, because it's going to be like your master's program, but even more. So if you find that enjoyable, if you really like what you're working on, and you just can't satiate the curiosity inside of you, then this might be for you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So just to continue off this great conversation, what were your expectations, or what are your expectations of the job market right now for a PhD? In your research, did you find anything surprising about it?
I'm already employed, so I have a pretty, I guess, unique situation. and the PhD is just going to make me better at the job that I currently have. And also I'm doing public health in the middle of a pandemic. So, and the Department of Health is, experiencing a lot of turnover because of retirements. So I have no surprises for me. Public health seems to be a pretty lucrative place to be right now. But I think when people kind of also restrict it to academics is where it begins a little tough, where there's PhDs everywhere. There's PhDs in epidemiology, at pharmaceuticals. I mean, if you are thinking of money, there's PhDs at like the, local and state health department, so there's a lot of different options for you. And I think maybe a little naively that sometimes there needs to be a little bit of creativity with people who have PhDs and are looking for jobs, but that's just me. I'm in a position of privilege here, already employed, so don't listen to me anymore.
I was waiting for Ken.
Sure. I mean, I haven't graduated yet, but I can certainly tell you what we hear, and it's nothing that you probably haven't heard already, which is that, yeah, tenured positions are, an endangered species. But yeah, that being said, like Jackie was saying, you don't have to limit yourself to academia. There are so many other things you can do, outside the ivory tower. And that's kind of what I appreciate about the Graduate Center program, is that they're all about, sending their graduates off to do real world work. So, even, that part of part of what you have to do while you're in the program is teach. So I've never taught undergraduates before. This is my first time. But I see the appeal. It's really great, that you can kind of, help to shape the future. These kids are also thirsty for knowledge, and it's great to be able to help them, kind of navigate the craziness of the world right now. But yeah, I guess, the other good thing about the program where I am, just to keep selling CUNY, it's not only, they don't only set you up for academic jobs. So like, for example, right now, I'm working on a research project. Yes, that's pretty academic, right? It's a IRB approved project where we're going to go and do field work. But I also have a job working for a CUNY professor who has a Substack newsletter. Right, so I'm helping him edit that, and I'm learning the Substack game, and he brings on pretty famous guests every week. We're interviewing like Noam Chomsky and Francis Fukuyama. So that's something you can put on your resume. I'm not saying everybody is going to be able to do those things, but at CUNY, because you have such a basically New York City is your resource. You do have opportunities to do gain non-academic experience, which can hopefully translate after you graduate.
I started my doctoral program not thinking that I was going to be a full-time academic. I had taught some off and on in the past, but at Antioch University, when the doctoral program in leadership and change started, to be honest, the accreditation agencies were like, you guys are doing what again? You're having these mid-careerists and people with various ages. Our age range from, there were a couple people who were in their 20s, only a couple. Most of us were 40, 50, and even older as part of the program and had full careers. And so we started off, they called us practitioner scholars. And once we completed the program, we were scholar practitioners. Most people, there were some people who wanted to get the doctorate because they were in an academia already, or they were assistant principals, and once they got to be a principal, at their salary, stature would just would just increase. So we had people of all ranges, but most people who graduated from the program I was in, they were not looking toward academic careers at all. We had people, had this woman from Kenya who I mean, talk about absolutely amazing, who really established a fantastic system, metropolitan, what we would call it a metropolitan system in her home country. And so we had students like that. Now the Antioch program is considered a role model for programs. It was always accredited. When I first started, it was, I can't remember what they called it, temporary accreditation or something like that, because I was in the 6th cohort there. Now they're in the 30th or something like that. I can't remember the number, but it's been there a long time, and it's considered to be one of the most innovative programs in the country. And almost everybody worked while they were, and it's designed for people who work full time, and designed for people for whom we always say life gets in the way. You know, my husband, my beloved husband, died while I was studying, and it was the experience of being in a cohort, and so that's a good thing too. You know, that's wonderful about the cohort experiences, that I had another group of support people who literally helped drag me across the finish line when I was faltering. And so you want to have, when you talk about supportive people around you, it's really great to have that. And other people had stories as you know, as deep as the one I just told you. But I also had, ringing in the back of my ears, a couple of things, motivating factors for me, is that in my family, my oldest brother, who's 5 years older than I, was the first one in our family to graduate from college. I grew up in a poor family in Erie, Pennsylvania, and education was always important. We didn't necessarily have the information about doctoral programs, but education was very important. My oldest brother became a dentist, and he's always been supportive of me. So we had that, but when I got my doctorate, it was even more so. It was not so much the career advancement, although for younger people, I say focus on the career advancement, but it was the feeling of accomplishment that I had done it for the home team. You know what I'm saying? And I looked up in the heavens, and there was my mother, and there was my husband saying, "You did it." That made me, that made me very proud. And the other thing about achieving it, as you found with your undergraduate degrees and your master's degree, is the confidence that it gives you. And that is extremely important. You know that you can go into any setting and you belong there. And that's a really important thing, particularly for people, I think, who are first generation, whether they're immigrants or whether they're people who were born in the United States. It's really important. It's not just the credential, it's that the credential gives you the confidence to do what it is you really want to do.
Thank you for sharing that, a wonderful story, and again, for all your experiences. So Ken, I know we have offline on this before. I know that you're helping some of our current Marxe students who are interested in applying for the PhD program. You're actually helping them with their application process. So I'd love to hear from all of you. What was your application process like, and what tips do you have right now for students who are in the process?
Sure, I can start. Yeah, so my first suggestion is work on your personal statement. That is key. You basically have to, your personal statement is basically a story about you and why the next chapter in your life should be a PhD, why it makes sense for you. And if you can tell that story compellingly, then I think, you know, you're in pretty good shape. I was fortunate that, you know, when I was applying, I had already met some current PhD students at the Graduate Center. And they gave me, great advice, kind of like what I'm giving you now. But they also, I reached out to people and asked if I could take a look at their personal statement. And you'd be surprised how many people, were like, yeah, sure, you can read what I wrote. And then that gives you an idea of kind of how to tell your story, right? I would say that's kind of the most important aspect. And then also don't wait on the letters of recommendation. And that's where, the Marx professors were excellent. I mean, they really helped me with with getting that stuff together, and encouraged me throughout the process. But yeah, I would say the first place to start is your personal statement.
Yeah, I mean, that's like Ken said, like do some soul searching and just really make sure that this is something like deep in your heart, gut, whatever is the vital organ to your decision-making process, that this is really what you want to do. Because I don't know, you kind of read some personal statements and you can kind of show that like sometimes the person's not into it. So just really make sure that you're into it, whatever you do. I think the other thing too that I found really helpful, I know Ken talked about faculty as well, being able, I had an interview for my PhD. So being able to kind of like discuss the research that was already being done by the institution that I applied, I think was really helpful, not just for me, but also for my application, to kind of show that these are the people I wanted to work with, and this was the kind of work that I wanted to do as well. So, yeah.
Dr. Bell, do you have anything to add on the application process?
Other than, I think just start early too. Just don't be rushed with that. After you do what was just said, put it aside, then go back and look at, this is one of the single most important things that you will ever write. And so just put it aside, come back at it and go, yes, I'd admit that person. And if you can look at your application and think, gee, yes, it is finally, don't do as I tell the students sometimes, and I know no one on this call would do that, is that once you think it's done, then do another review, because you may think it's done, but for someone else, it may read like a first or second draft. You don't ever want it to read like that. And of course, make sure that and have someone else read it. Have someone have someone else review it for you, and so that they can see, have you really told the story that you want to tell? And they may ask a couple of questions as well, and you can reflect upon that. But give yourself time to do it right.
That's wonderful. And just speaking on a personal statement, so I'm not currently in a PhD program, but for the higher ed capstone, we actually do have to write a personal statement. And so I know when I was writing mine, it went through multiple drafts of having people look at it, utilizing the writing center here at Marxe. They're absolutely wonderful, because you're absolutely right. It can sound so good. So like, I do this, I've done this. But when you read it, you're like, oh no. Or like when you hear someone else read it, you're like, oh gosh. At first, so no, this is all great advice, all great advice. So thank you for joining us. Those are the questions that I have set for the panel. I'm now going to open it up to questions from our audience. Students, you can either write your questions in the chat. Feel free to use the raise hand function. There was one question that did come in through earlier in the session. Maria said, thank you all for being here with us. Your input is appreciated. With remote life, how do you feel about doing PhDs online?
I just want to understand about online. I don't believe in full online courses. I think that does not enhance your educational experience. if the thing about the doctoral program I was in, they had residencies, and the residencies were very intense. They've now, because the students have insisted upon shortening the time, but you would go for a week or 5 days, and it's absolutely concentrated with some of the best teachers ever. And that was important. And then it would be online in between, of course. And it was also a cohort model, so that they encouraged us to have our study groups, which we did. And so that was important. But I don't like fully online classes, and I just don't like them. I personally don't like them. I don't think that they you can't interact in a way. And part of it is that I go to school as part of the learning experience. The way my educational journey has been, it's not just been for career advancement. But I would even say that for other people, that you really want to have, it opens, it's trite, but it's true. The educational experience opens up horizons to you, and you start thinking you want an interaction in a way that fully online, just to me, does not give you.
I mean, I think it's been unique during the pandemic that I started my PhD in 2019. So I kind of knew and had made like relationships with like people in my cohort before starting. So I think we've been really seamlessly able to interact online. I also am a very online person. I just love the internet and being online. So I haven't had a big problem with it. I feel like there's still spaces to communicate and like bounce ideas off of people. I guess like saying that, I know that classes are going to start coming in person soon. So I think whatever, I don't know if this is like what the question is, but if you're expecting, I guess, for example, my school, the School of Public Health, to be completely online, I don't think that's going to be the reality. But I really do appreciate how lenient they are. Like, I know prior COVID, I had a sick day once. I just could not get out of bed, but I was still able to join up with classes online. I think that being said, I think the online space is going to be really important to ensuring, I guess, continuity of classes for people. But I think I have to agree with Dr. Bell that I think those in-person moments are really crucial, as well as, and I'm sure Ken could speak more about this, but field work placements might be required if you're doing a PhD that requires field work to be out in a field, which obviously would be hard to do online, but that's just what I think.
Well, I just wanted to clarify too, by in person, I also mean like this. But using the technology to do it, because I understand where we are now. But there's some courses that's when they say online, that's it. There's no interaction with people.
Yeah, and I guess like along the same lines, like I think if you're at a PhD level, those asynchronous courses it's important to just make sure you have those time management skills, which if you're at a PhD level, you probably should have some.
Yeah, I agree that, it's hard to replace the in-person experience. And part of the reason that's important is because, you are gonna, your colleagues are hopefully, future people you might end up doing research with, or who might hire you, or you might hire them. So, spending time with your fellow students is a really important part of the experience. It's been difficult, of course. I mean, I'm sure people at Marxe are in the same position. Everything was online for a year. So at the Graduate Center, we're just coming back to in person. I have 2 classes and part of the semester is in person. I'm just meeting people for the first time, who I've only seen on screen for the past year. So yeah, it's, we're all dealing with this situation. But yeah, hopefully, we come out of this, understanding that there are, you can't replace real life, but there are some benefits to, having virtual spaces. And as someone with a young kid at home, this is definitely helpful, the flexibility that, having remote classes provided, because, you can kind of, you know, multitask and so forth. But yeah, I mean, my cohort and I, we probably missed out on a number of things. But you know, we're trying to make it back like everybody else. So yes, but it's tough to replace in person.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I had this wonderful student who never showed his face on the screen, and you can't for people to do that or do it. But for his last A paper, because he only turned in A papers, he made a comment in the final paper as a disabled person, and I went, "That's why that having it online was so important. That was important to him. I never knew that for the whole time. He only slipped it in that last paper." And I said, well, all right. It was very impressive, very impressive.
That's wonderful. So Gail had put in a couple questions, so I'll break her question into two. Thank you so much for a great discussion. What are the costs involved in doing a PhD program? And I'll put in parentheses at CUNY. I'll also open it up to your experience, Dr. Bell. And are there any opportunities to earn income through fellowships, teaching, or research?
Yeah, I can take that question too. Once you fulfill the teaching requirement in my program, and of course, like all the programs are different. Once I completed the teaching requirement, there were a lot of opportunities for doctorate level students to either be research assistants, even part-time, like 6 hours a week, or teach class, being a TA for additional income, and then also be an adjunct lecturer. So I taught a class one semester. I feel like I've done so much and I've only been there for like 2.5 years. But I guess that just goes to show you that it opens up a lot of different doors for you to work with a lot of different people and kind of dip your toes into a lot of different things. And I also know that I get a lot of emails about this, that for your dissertation, there's also dean dissertation grants to kind of help propel you through your dissertation. So it depends on the program, but personally speaking, for me, there's been a lot of opportunities for that.
I would second that with every day, my email inbox is flooded with emails from the department with, you know, this scholarship and that fellowship and this opportunity and that teaching opportunity. I mean, it's just, you really have to pick and choose, you know, wisely, because you have a limited amount of time, but there's a constant flow of opportunities, you know, once you get into the program. So there's certainly no shortage, I would say. Like, for example, just yesterday, I got an offer to teach at Hunter last year, you know, because a fellow professor at Queens College saw that, I guess I didn't get a terrible rating on Rate My Professor. So supposedly the students are okay with what I'm doing. So, you know, they recommended me for something else. So these types of things will come up constantly. So I would say there's no shortage. On the other hand, you have to be choosy about, you know, what you think is best for your experience and what, you know, where you want to spend your time. But yes, there's a constant flow of opportunities, especially at the Graduate Center.
Thank you.
Okay, and then the second part of Gail's question is, should you be applying to PhD programs in the year you're expected to graduate? How much harder is it to apply after you've graduated from Marxe?
So I applied before I finished. So I finished all of my credits for the MIA program at the end of 2019. And I was already working on my application in fall of 2019 to start in the fall of 2020. So basically you're applying for a year from now. So if you can fit it into your schedule now, I would say, you know, do it, because when you apply now, you're not going to start until fall 2022 at the earliest. So yeah, and I think this is true of most PhD programs. They only take, a new cohort every fall. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I waited a year between graduating and applying because I got married, and that turned out to be like a full-time job in itself. So I waited a year to just get, I guess, personal things in order, but also to kind of like make sure I had a really good personal statement. Kind of like what I said, I had a capstone paper that really drove me to apply for a PhD and really strongly consider it. So I needed a year buffer to be like, is this really what I want to do?
So if I could just follow up, you were still able to get in touch with professors and get all the letters of recommendation or whatever you would need. Even if you were,
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with that at all. I mean, make sure you know your professors and they know who you are, because that also matters. And I mean, I hope I was memorable, but it's really important to, I mean, like anything, like cultivate relationships while you're there and not just make it an afterthought.
okay, thank you.
Dr. Bell, did you have anything to add for on like how, like on your application timeline?
I think it's important to do it when you're ready, and that people have, and a gap year is fine. I had one. My experience is very different in a way, so that's why I was hesitant to mention it. I did a letter of recommendation for someone who took a gap decade. That's too long. I wanted to say sure enough, but said gap decade did an entirely different thing from the study that he wanted to get in, but did beautifully. And so it worked for him. He had a sense of he certainly was mature and was focused. He was focused on that. And so it really depends, but I think when you're ready that's the best answer that I can say. And sometimes you just need a year off, and professors do remember you. And if they don't, here's what I suggest to people is that when you write a professor for a recommendation or something, just remind them of what of your experience in class. For example, when students ask me for recommendations now for jobs or fellowships or things like that, I say to them, I remember you, but there are a lot of students. Just send me, I do grade memos for each paper. So I do relatively detailed grade memos. So I said, send me your summary grade memo, and then please attach your last paper or something like that, just so that I'm refreshed by what has done. And that works for me, and it seems to work for the students.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we are closing up the hours here. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So thank you again for Ken, Jackie, and Dr. Bell for joining us today. If students have questions afterwards, would it be all right if they had emailed you? I will absolutely send a wrap-up email to everyone with the recording today for anyone who has missed it as well. So thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and we're almost to the end of the week. You got it.
And thank you for doing such a great job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.